Welcome to week 13 for ED 2491 and the final YouTube video for this subject. It has been a real pleasure creating these videos for you, and I hope that you have found them both informative and interesting to watch and listen to. If you are anything like me, you find listening to be a very effective way to learn, and for that reason you may have found that these videos were beneficial in cementing what you need to know in regards to your assessments and just in regards to teaching as a practice. Well, the focus of this final week's presentation will be teaching as a moral craft, meaning how teaching is shaped by our morals and ethics. Because ethics shapes everything you do as a teacher, from how you interact with your students and colleagues to even how you conduct your lives outside the school environment, this topic is undoubtedly important and needs careful consideration before you head off to your upcoming practicums. So by the end of week 13, you should be able to apply an ethical problem-solving approach to school-based situations or scenarios, describe everyday teacher classroom actions from an ethical perspective, explain the terms ethics, code of ethics, and ethical dilemmas, give examples of teacher classroom behaviours that embody the values that constitute the Queensland College of Teachers Code of Ethics, reflect on your lesson plans and classroom strategies from an ethical perspective, and lastly, synthesise the work that you did this semester in ED 2491 throughout your final assessment task. So to begin this topic, you will be considering whether there is a difference between the terms ethics and morals. What you will notice is that both terms are used interchangeably throughout the readings, and although there is a difference, for the purposes of this topic it is essential to know that both ethics and morals guide your behaviour as a teacher. However, ethics is a term that organisations will use when referring to values and beliefs they want their staff or employees to follow, or a set of philosophical principles that an organisation, such as the Queensland College of Teachers, will outline as informing and guiding the practice of its professionals. Even medical and media professionals, which are both very different professions, will also have a code of ethics that will inform and guide their practice. And the public can use these ethics to hold its members accountable. You may have heard this mentioned in news accounts about the media breaching the code of ethics or medical professionals breaching the code of ethics, and then that being a topic of debate or discussion. Campbell, in your readings, defines these professional ethics in relation to the teaching profession as follows. He states, professional ethics is conceived of broadly as elements of human virtue in all its complexity, as expressed through the nuances of attitudes, intentions, words and actions of the professional teacher. Simply, it is a realization of good and the struggle against bad as they apply to the everyday practice of teachers as individuals and as a collective professional group. So there you have it. It's a set of philosophical principles, if you like, that guide the behaviour of teachers, and where they try to aim for what is deemed as good behaviour rather than something that's considered to be bad or unethical. So what you may be thinking at this stage is whether these codes are required to be followed under the court of law. Well, as you may no doubt be aware of, it is the code is a set of guidelines, but it's not actually a piece of legislation. So there are many things that could be a breach of the code's guidelines, but under a court of law, they would not be considered a crime. So, for example, a teacher may engage in a behaviour that is deemed legal by the court of law, but not actually considered ethical. Can you think of any immediate examples? Well, one example that came to my mind when I was thinking about this particular subject was a scenario where a teacher is discussing the affairs or the circumstances of another student to a group of students. So in effect, telling some students some personal information or something about another student to this group of students. Although the teacher's behaviour is not actually breaching the law, like she or he could not be charged for violating any particular legal policy, the teacher could the behaviour can be deemed as unethical. I'd be interested to see what you think about this. and what examples you would give in the discussion board or in your tutorial about what you think is deemed to be unethical as opposed to illegal behaviour. I'm sure you can think of many others. So to conclude this discussion about codes, we know that a code of conduct or practice will outline what is required of teachers, whereas the code of ethics will guide behaviour. There are differences between these codes, and this is something that you'll read more about in this week's readings. However, what is important to remember for now is that before you go into your practicum, it's very important to get an understanding of what is the school that you're going to, what is their code of ethics and code of conduct, and also to be familiar with the Queensland College of Teachers Code of Ethics, as this is something that you will be increasingly exposed to throughout not only your university experience but also your teaching experience. And also to be registered with the Queensland College of Teachers, you need to follow the guidelines as well and have an understanding of them. So that's why this topic is so important. So as your upcoming practicum is no doubt in your mind, and you're all having, obviously anticipating the experience, what is essential at this stage is to find out what is your school's rules and legalities, and how to handle situations that have no clear rules or legalities. So are there any shades of grey in the school's policy? And what this basically means is that in regards to the policy of your school, not everything is outlined on how you should behave, and there are some things that the school just deems to be either as common sense, and I'm using that in quotation marks, or it's just something that is based on the teacher's conscience. So what is important to remember is that the clearer you are about the law, the ethics of your profession, your own values, and how to go about making decisions regarding these matters, the less stressful your decision making will be when it comes to what is good or ethical behaviour and what is not. Marsh states that ethical decision making can be challenging, but this is particularly so when there are tensions between competing values, so compared to your values and beliefs and what the actual school espouses or has, within its code of ethics. Nevertheless, you always follow what feels right to you, and at the end of the day, what you can live with. So that's what I think is most essential. It's you'll behave according to how your conscience guides your behaviour and what you feel you can live with at the end of the day. So before we conclude, we'll look at what, according to Campbell, you should do in order to think and act ethically. You'll need to identify your core principles. So what are your values and beliefs and how they affect your behaviour, and are they in line with the code of ethics? You'll also need to listen to your conscience, because that is a very powerful force in guiding your behaviour. Think ahead of the potential consequences. So your conscience would often guide you in that direction too, thinking about what possible consequences will my behaviour or this situation have in the future. Always put your students first. That's deemed as paramount. Their needs, their safety and their learning needs are most important. Behave like a public professional. So even if you're not being directly observed, you're always with the awareness that you're in the public and you're a professional. That'll guide your behaviour. Reserve personal opinion on contestable issues. So I would avoid discussing anything that's controversial in regards to politics, religion, sex, or anything that's considered to be not something you'd openly share with the public. Also, do not compromise moral principles. So ensure that you always stay within your moral framework and not be inclined to be influenced by particular subcultures within the school, with students' backgrounds, and always, portray that strong moral framework. Familiarise yourself with school rules, accept norms, policies and legal information, so always behaving in accordance with what the school expects. Seek advice when you're unsure from your colleagues, and most of all, ensure integrity. That's to me is paramount, that you always follow your ethical framework, and that people believe you to be trustworthy and a highly moral being. So this summarises this week's discussion on ethical teaching. We now know that good teachers are ethical teachers. We also know that the Queensland College of Teachers has a code of ethics that teachers need to follow in order to be registered as a teacher in Queensland. Finally, we know that behaving ethically needs to be guided by the school's code of ethics, but also by our conscience and our integrity. It is most of all these two latter elements that will guide our behaviour and enable us to be the wonderful role models that we aspire to be. In this week's tutorial workshop discussion board, you will choose a practice or a set of practices from your own professional repertoire, or that you have experienced in your last professional experience, or in relation to a school past or present that is worth examining from an ethical perspective. Given that an ethical dimension underlies everything that we do as teachers, it is also important to critically reflect on routine practices and classroom situations. There are a number of examples that reflect on the routine in this week's learning module. Firstly, describe the practice or situation. Secondly, with reference to the Queensland College of Teachers Code of Ethics or Campbell's list of principles, analyse your practice or situation from an ethical perspective by identifying relevant core principles, examining existing tensions or possible compromises between these principles, and documenting possible or real consequences, outcomes or impacts. For example, compare outcomes from different approaches to management of a student who refused to participate in group work, or in example 3 in your learning guide. Finally, in light of your analysis, discuss how would you transform your future practice or change your future actions if a similar situation arose. And this is basically what you're discussing with your peer or peers in the discussion board or in the tutorial. In this week's personal journal entry, you will Google or use a dictionary to find the meaning of virtue. You'll search for the list of virtues. In your search, you'll ask yourself the question, did you find the 6 virtues that the Queensland College of Teachers refers to as ideals in its code of ethics for Queensland teachers? And you also make a list of the virtues that you would like to concentrate on developing in your next ProFEX, using the subject learning outcomes as guidelines. So, using the subject learning outcomes as guidelines, once you have completed your second assessment task, you will reflect on the extent which you achieved the learning outcomes of the subject listed here. Identify and plan for the diverse needs of your learners. Critique by drawing on theoretical perspectives and empirical data. Design lesson plans from using a range of pedagogical strategies that provide intellectually challenging learning experiences. Devise and critically evaluate a range of strategies and micro skills for creating and maintaining safe and supportive learning environments at the classroom level. Reflect on teacher wellbeing, in particular ethics and resilience, using the National Professional Standards as guidelines. Another way to review how your participation in subject has contributed to your development in becoming a teacher is by looking at the National Professional Standards. Keep in mind that this is just one subject of many that you do in your course. You're asked to go to your subject outline to the assessment summary section and look at the elements of the professional standards that this subject has helped you to develop. Reflect on the specific knowledge and skills that you have required for each of these substandards. For example, one standard says that the teacher was able to identify and develop understanding of the diverse backgrounds and characteristics of the students they teach. And that sums up the personal journal entries. Sounds like a lot, but it's just basically breaking it down into the elements that you need to think about. Okay. I think I've missed a slide. Okay, that's it for this final video for week 13. If you have any further questions or suggestions, please see the learning guide, the subject outline, Learn JCU and Facebook for further contact details and information about this subject. Or you can contact me directly via my email. So thank you for listening to the final YouTube video for the week 13. Again, it has been a real pleasure, and I wish you the very best in your future studies. It's been great working with you, and I think that you're all going to become very capable and effective teachers, and I look forward to working with you again. So thank you, and bye for now.